Basically good in that the universe was basically fair. The Valkyrie had shot him in the back. He was trying to save others. She did not cry. There would be time for tears later, after the job was done. Instead, she went to the bridge and began preparing her ship for war on Luna. In the underground laboratories of the Prometheus Development Facility, Dr. Simon Clark was reviewing the final specifications for the weapon known as the Cascade. He was a thin man with nervous hands and glasses that were always slightly crooked. He had spent 20 years developing weapons he hoped would never be used, and now he was watching his nightmares become reality. The Cascade was not like other weapons. It did not explode or burn or crush. Instead, it attacked the fundamental forces that held matter together, invisible bonds between atoms that made solid things solid. When those bonds were broken, matter simply ceased to exist in any organized form. It dissolved into particles, then into energy, then into nothing. Clark had calculated that a single Cascade warhead could eliminate a moon. A full salvo, properly directed, could destroy a planet in minutes. He had never wanted to find out if his calculations were correct. "Dr. Clark," said his assistant, a young woman named Beth Rogers, "Admiral Kane is on the line. He wants to confirm that the weapons are ready for deployment." Clark looked at his creation, gleaming and terrible in the laboratory lights. He thought about what it would do, what it would mean. He thought about the 847 people on Horizon Station. About the 4-year-old child who would never grow up. "Tell them they are ready," he said. The fleet assembled near Jupiter, using the massive planet's gravity well to mask their final preparations. 200 ships gathered in formation, representing every colony and station in human space. Some were military vessels, sleek and deadly. Others were converted merchant ships, armed with whatever weapons could be bolted to their hulls. All of them carried crews who knew they might not come home. Admiral Kane addressed them from the bridge of his flagship, his image broadcast to every ship in the fleet. "You know why we are here?" he said. "You have seen what was done to our people. The Valkyrie believe that we are weak, that we will run and hide when faced with their violence. They are wrong. Today, we show them what humanity does when our children are murdered. Today we show them that there are lines that cannot be crossed." On the Resolute, Captain Harmon watched the Admiral's speech with her command crew. When it ended, she turned to face them. "What we are about to do will change everything," she said. "There will be no going back. The universe will remember this moment, for good or for ill. But they made their choice when they attacked our station. Now we make ours." The fleet jumped to hyperspace, 200 points of light vanishing into the darkness. Behind them, Earth continued its slow rotation, blue and green and precious. The people there went about their lives, hoping and praying for the safety of their soldiers, for justice. For peace, none of them knew that peace was already dead. What was coming was something else entirely. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, a sphere of death surrounding the planet for Thex. 200 ships against the heart of an empire. And not one of them hesitated. From the bridge of the Resolute, Captain Harmon got her first look at the enemy homeworld. It was a harsh planet, covered in red deserts and rocky mountains, with cities that looked like fortresses carved from the stone itself. Orbital platforms circled it like iron rings, bristling with weapons. And everywhere she looked, there were ships. Hundreds of ships, far more than intelligence had predicted. "Tactical analysis," she said calmly. Her first officer, Commander Jake Preston, studied his screens with grim focus. "I'm counting at least 500 warships, Captain. Possibly more behind the planet. Their orbital defenses are fully active, so we're outnumbered 2 to 1. Could be worse. Captain, with respect, it could not be much worse." Harmon allowed herself a small smile. "Then we better make sure we hit first and hardest." Ash. On the surface of Vertex, Warlord Crystal watched the human fleet with growing unease. He had expected retaliation. He had not expected this. The humans had assembled their entire military force and jumped straight to the heart of his empire. It was either the bravest thing he had ever seen or the most foolish. He decided it was foolish. These soft creatures did not understand war. They did not understand that numbers always won in the end. All ships attack formation, he commanded. Destroy them all. Leave none alive. The Valkyrie fleet surged forward, a wave of metal and fire aimed at the human formation. Plasma cannons lit up the void. Missiles streaked toward their targets. And the greatest battle in galactic history began. Admiral Kane had positioned his fleet carefully, using the defensive capabilities of the larger ships to protect the smaller ones. The humans fought with desperate precision, each ship covering its neighbors, each captain knowing exactly what was expected of them. They had trained for this moment, even if they had never believed it would come. The first hour of battle was pure chaos. Ships exploded on both sides, their crews dying in the vacuum of space. The Resolute took hit after hit, its shields flaring with each impact, but it did not fall. Captain Harmon moved through the destruction with cold focus, directing her weapons, coordinating with the other captains, refusing to give ground. "Status on the Cascade," she said quietly. Commander Preston checked his readings. "Charged and ready, Captain. Dr. Clark's team confirms all systems are functioning within parameters." Harmon nodded. They had one chance. If the weapon failed, if the Valkyrie destroyed the Resolute before it could fire, everything would be lost. On the flagship, Admiral Kane watched the battle unfold with growing concern. The humans were holding their own, but they could not win a war of attrition. For every Valkyrie ship they destroyed, they lost one of their own. The mathematics were simple and brutal, Admiral said, his communications officer. "Captain Harmon is requesting permission to deploy the primary weapon." Kane looked at the planet on his screen. Vertex, homeworld of the Valkyrie Empire, home to 3 billion sentient beings, most of whom had nothing to do with the attack on Horizon Station. They were civilians, workers, families. They had children who played in the dust of the red deserts. Elders who told stories of ancient glories, and they belonged to a species that had murdered 847 humans without hesitation or remorse. "Permission granted," Kane said. "May God forgive us for what we are about to do." The Resolute moved to the center of the human formation, its escorts falling back to give it room. The massive dreadnought's hull began to glow with energy as systems that had never been activated came online. Power readings climbed beyond anything the crew had seen before, beyond anything that should have been possible on Luna. Dr. Simon Clark watched the telemetry with trembling hands. The numbers matched his calculations exactly. The weapon was working. In minutes, it would fire. He thought about going outside, looking up at the sky, seeing the stars one last time before everything changed. But he could not move. He could only watch and wait, and hope that history would not judge them too harshly. Captain Harmon sat in her command chair, her hand resting on the armrest that contained the final authorization control. She thought about Kevin, about the way he used to laugh, about the messages he had sent her just days before his death. He had been excited about some new music he had discovered. Some artist from a colony she had never visited. She would never hear that music now. He would never share it with her. "Targeting solution locked," Commander Preston reported. "The weapon is fully charged. We are ready to fire." Harmon looked around her bridge at the men and women who had served with her through so many years. They were scared, she could see it in their faces. But they were also determined. They had all seen the footage from Horizon Station. They all knew what was at stake. "Final authorization code," she said clearly, inputting the sequence that would unlock the weapon. Code accepted. Cascade weapon armed. Valkyrie seemed to realize what was happening. Their attacks intensified, plasma bolts raining against the Resolute's shields with desperate fury. They did not know exactly what the humans were planning, but they sensed that something terrible was coming. They were right. Harmon's hand hovered over the activation switch. 3 seconds passed, each one feeling like an eternity. She saw the faces of the dead in her mind. Commander Holloway, who had refused to kneel. Dr. Dunn, who had died protecting a child. Katie Morrison, who had noticed something wrong and been ignored. Linda Harper, who had faced death standing. And Kevin, her brother. The best person she had ever known. She pressed the switch. The cascade fired from the Resolute in a beam of pure white light. So bright that it overwhelmed every sensor in the fleet. It struck Vertex at the southern pole and began to spread. From space, it looked almost beautiful, like frost forming on a window, like lightning captured in slow motion. Tendrils of energy crawled across the planet's surface, touching everything, consuming everything. The cities went first. Fortress walls that had stood for centuries dissolved like sand in water. Buildings collapsed into their foundations, then collapsed further into nothing. The red deserts cracked and fell inward. Revealing the hollow core of a dying world, Crystal was screaming orders when the wave reached. At his palace, he had time to understand what was happening, to feel a moment of pure terror before he simply ceased to exist. His advisors, his guards, his servants, all of them vanished in the same instant. The oceans boiled. The mountains crumbled. The atmosphere caught fire and burned away into the void. 14 minutes after Captain Harmon pressed the switch, Vertex was gone. Where a planet had been, there was only an expanding cloud of particles, glowing faintly in the light of the system's red sun. 3 billion lives, an entire civilization, erased from existence. The Valkyrie fleet stopped fighting. Their ships hung motionless in space, their crews staring at the place where their world had been. Some of them simply shut down, their pilots unable to process what they had witnessed. Others turned their weapons on themselves rather than live with the knowledge. Admiral Kane's voice came through on all frequencies, speaking to human and Valkyrie alike. "This is Admiral Victor Kane of the United Human Federation. Vertex has been destroyed in response to your unprovoked attack on Frontier Station Horizon. Any Valkyrie ship that surrenders immediately will be spared. Any ship that continues hostilities will be destroyed. This message will not be repeated." The surviving Valkyrie surrendered. There was nothing else they could do. The battle was over. The war was over. But the consequences were just beginning. The human fleet returned to Earth 3 weeks after the destruction of Vertex. There were no celebrations, no victory parades, no cheering crowds. The ships docked quietly at their orbital stations, and their crews went home to families who did not know what to say to them. Captain Elizabeth Harmon stood at the observation deck of the Resolute. For a long time, looking down at the blue and green planet that had sent her to war, she had not slept properly since pressing the switch. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the light spreading across Vertex, saw the planet breaking apart, saw the place where 3 billion lives had ended in 14 minutes. She had done what was necessary. She knew that. But knowing did not make it easier. Commander Preston found her there 2 hours after the rest of the crew had departed. He stood beside her in silence, looking at the same planet, thinking the same thoughts. "The Admiral wants to give you a medal," he said finally. Harmon made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Tell him to keep it. I don't want a medal for what I did. What you did saved humanity. What I did killed 3 billion people. Most of them had nothing to do with Horizon Station. They were just living their lives the same as anyone else." Preston did not argue. There was nothing to argue about. They had done what they had done, and they would carry the weight of it forever. "Admiral Victor." Kane submitted his resignation the day after the fleet returned. President Moore refused to accept it. She needed him for what came next, she said. The diplomatic aftermath, the reconstruction of human defenses, the 1,000 decisions that would shape the next century of galactic politics. Kane accepted, though he wished he could walk away. He was 60 years old, and he felt every one of those years pressing down on him. He had commanded fleets in battle, lost friends and colleagues to enemy fire, made decisions that had cost lives. But nothing had prepared him for this. Nothing could have. In his private quarters, he kept a photograph of Frontier Station Horizon. It showed the station as it had been before the attack, a small but proud outpost on the edge of human space. He looked at it every night before he went to sleep, reminding himself why they had done what they did. It did not help, but he kept looking anyway. The Valkyrie Empire collapsed within months of losing its homeworld. Without central leadership, the various colony worlds fell into civil war. Warlords fought each other for control of resources and territory. While millions of civilians fled to neutral space or surrendered to human forces, the surviving Valkyrie were treated according to the laws of war. They were given food and shelter, medical care, and legal representation. Some humans protested this, demanding vengeance, demanding that the aliens suffer as their victims had suffered. But President Moore refused. "We are not them," she said in her address to the Federation Council. "We destroyed their world because we had to, because they left us no choice. But we will not become monsters in their image. We will show the galaxy that humanity can be merciful even to those who have wronged us." It was a fine speech. Many people believed it, but everyone knew the truth. Humanity had shown the galaxy what it was capable of, and no amount of mercy could erase that knowledge in the months that followed. Representatives from a dozen alien civilizations requested meetings with human diplomats. Some came to offer alliances, hoping to shelter under humanity's protection. Others came to negotiate trade agreements, eager to stay on good terms with the species that had erased a planet. A few came simply to understand. To learn how such a young civilization had developed such terrible weapons, Ambassador. Gregory Fuller met with the Consortium of 12, an alliance of elder species who had watched humanity's expansion with cautious interest. The meeting took place on a neutral station, in a room designed to accommodate a dozen different body types. The lead ambassador was a being called Thelvern, a creature that looked like a cross between a tree and an octopus. It had observed galactic politics for 3 centuries, and it had seen empires rise and fall. But it had never seen anything like what humanity had done. "You have demonstrated a capacity for violence that exceeds anything in recorded galactic history," Thelvern said. Its voice translated by a small device attached to Fuller's ear. "A single ship destroyed an entire world. We must ask, will you use this weapon again?" Fuller had prepared for this question. He had spent weeks with advisors and speechwriters, crafting the perfect response. But when the moment came, he set aside his notes and spoke from the heart. "We did not start this war," he said. "We built our colonies in peace. We extended offers of friendship to every species we encountered. The Valkyrie chose to see our compassion as weakness and our mercy as an invitation. They murdered our people, including children, and broadcast the massacre as a warning to others." "That does not answer the question," Thelvern observed. "No," Fuller agreed. "It does not, because the answer depends on you, on all of you. Humanity will not be subjugated. We will not be slaughtered like animals. If there are those who would prey upon us, who would murder our children and call it strength, they should remember what happened to Verthex." He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the room. "But if there are those who wish to live alongside us, to trade and learn and build together, they will find no better friends in the galaxy. We are capable of great destruction, yes, but we are also capable of great compassion. The choice of which face we show to the universe is not ours alone. It is a choice we all make together." The consortium considered his words for a long time. In the end, they chose alliance over confrontation. So did most of the other species who came to negotiate with humanity. Fear, it turned out, was a powerful motivation for peace. On Earth, memorials were built for the 847 victims of Frontier Station Horizon. Their names were carved in stone at the Geneva Assembly Hall, on the walls of every spaceport, on plaques aboard every ship in the fleet. Humanity would remember what had been done to them. They would remember the children who died in the storage container, the doctor who gave her life for a patient, the commander who refused to kneel. Captain Elizabeth Harmon retired from active service 6 months after the war. She took a position teaching at the Naval Academy, training the next generation of officers. She never spoke publicly about pressing the switch, but her students understood. They could see it in her eyes, in the way she paused sometimes in the middle of lectures. Lost in memories she could not share, she taught them about duty and sacrifice, about the weight of command, about the difference between victory and justice. She taught them that war was not glorious, that every decision carried consequences, that the worst thing about being a leader was living with the choices you had made. She taught them, and she hoped they would never have to learn those lessons firsthand. Dr. Simon Clark destroyed his research notes on the Cascade weapon. Every calculation, every diagram, every file was wiped from existence. He testified before the Federation's Senate. explaining in simple terms what the weapon could do and why it should never be built again. Then he disappeared to a quiet colony on the edge of human space, where he grew vegetables in a small garden and tried to forget. He never succeeded. But he kept trying anyway. And in the vast darkness between stars, the other civilizations of the galaxy adjusted their understanding of humanity. The young species from the third planet of an ordinary star was no longer a curiosity to be observed. They were a power to be respected. They had shown that they could build and create and dream, but also that they could destroy on a scale that terrified even the oldest races. Humanity was neither good nor evil. They were simply human, capable of compassion and cruelty, of love and hate, of building worlds and erasing them. They were everything that sentient beings could be, for better and for worse. The galaxy had never been so quiet. The stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the small dramas of mortal creatures. But those mortal creatures, human and alien alike, looked at the void with new understanding. In minutes, when the metal beams came down, Dr. Dunn wrapped her body around the boy, trying to shield him from the worst of it. The impact broke her spine, but she did not let go. They found them hours later, still together, still holding on. Neither had survived. Security Chief Marcus Webb was a large man with a calm voice and steady hands. He had served in 3 military campaigns before taking the quiet posting on Horizon, and he had thought his fighting days were behind him. But when the Valkyrie boarding pod slammed into the station's hull, he remembered everything he had tried to forget.
All security personnel,
Fall back to the cargo bay, he ordered through his communicator. We're going to create a defensive line and buy time for the evacuation shuttles. He had 30 people under his command. 30 against hundreds. But what choice did they have? The first Valkyrie soldiers came through the breached airlock like nightmares given form. They were taller than humans by half a meter, their scaled bodies covered in black armor, their forearms carrying weapons that glowed with deadly energy. They moved with terrifying speed, and they showed no hesitation, no mercy. Katie Morrison was running through the maintenance corridors when she encountered her first Valkyrie. It stepped out of the shadows ahead of her, its yellow eyes fixing on her with cold interest. She froze, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The creature raised its weapon, and then Chief Lane appeared from a side passage, tackling the alien from behind. He was not a young man, and he was not a soldier, but he fought with the desperate strength of someone protecting others. Run, he screamed at Katie. Get to the shuttles. She ran. Behind her, she heard the sound of weapons fire, then silence. She did not look back. In the hydroponics garden, Linda Harper was guiding her students to a storage container hidden behind the alien trees. It was small and cramped, designed to hold equipment, but it was also hidden from casual view. Get inside, she told them, her voice calm despite her terror. Stay quiet. Do not come out until someone you trust tells you it is safe. Ms. Harper, what about you? One of the students asked, a boy named Peter with frightened eyes. I will lead them away from you. I will make noise, draw their attention. You just stay hidden. She closed the container and walked toward the garden's main entrance. She picked up a metal pole from the ground, not because she thought it would help against Valkyrie weapons, but because she refused to die empty-handed. They came for her minutes later. 3 soldiers, their scales gleaming in the artificial sunlight of the garden. They expected her to run. They expected her to beg. Linda Harper did neither. She stood among her plants, among the life she had grown and nurtured, and she faced her death with her head held high. The students heard the weapon fire. They covered their ears and held each other and tried not to cry. 4 hours later, the Valkyrie found them anyway. In the cargo bay, Marcus Webb and his team made their last stand. They had overturned cargo containers to create cover, and they had salvaged every weapon they could find. It was not enough. It would never be enough. Hold the line, Webb shouted as the first wave of Valkyrie charged their position. Make every shot count. They fought for 47 minutes. They killed dozens of the enemy, and one by one, they fell. 2 evacuation shuttles managed to launch during the battle. They carried 63 survivors, people who might have lived to tell the galaxy what had happened. But the Valkyrie warships were waiting, and their weapons were precise. Neither shuttle made it beyond the asteroid field. Commander Holloway was the last officer standing in the command center. Prescott had died defending the door, and most of his bridge crew lay dead at their stations. He was bleeding from multiple wounds, and his vision was growing dark at the edges. Crystal himself came to claim the kill. The warlord stepped over the bodies of the fallen, his armored feet leaving prints in the blood that covered the deck. He looked at the human commander with something that might have been respect or might have been amusement. "Kneel," Crystal commanded. "Kneel and I will give you a quick death." Holloway looked at the alien warlord. He thought about his daughter on Earth. He thought about the people he had failed to protect. He thought about the flag of the United Human Federation that hung on the wall behind him, torn and burned but still visible. "I am a commander in the Earth Defense Force," he said, his voice steady. "We do not kneel." Crystal made that sound again, the one that might have been laughter. Then he raised his weapon and fired. When it was over, when the last human on the station had been silenced, Crystal stood on the blood-soaked command deck and recorded his message. He spoke of the weakness of humans, of their foolishness in challenging the Valkyrie Empire, of the fate that awaited any species that stood in their way. The message was transmitted to every human colony, every station, every ship. It carried with it images of the dead, images that would burn themselves into the memory of humanity. On Earth, it was received 17 hours later, and everything changed. The message from Frontier Station Horizon reached Earth on a quiet Tuesday morning. It was spring in Geneva, and the cherry trees outside the United Human Federation headquarters were in full bloom. Birds sang in the gardens. Children walked to school. The world was peaceful. And then it was not. President Carolyn Moore was in a meeting with agricultural ministers when her chief of staff burst through the door, his face white as paper. She knew immediately that something terrible had happened. In 30 years of politics, she had learned to read faces, and his told her that the world had just changed forever. They moved to the secure briefing room, where military officers and intelligence analysts were already gathering. The main screen showed the recording from Crystal, his reptilian face twisted with contempt as he spoke of human weakness. Around him, the bodies of the station's crew lay scattered like broken dolls. No one spoke as the recording played. No one could. When it ended, Moore looked around the room. She saw shock on some faces, grief on others. But what she saw most of all was anger. A cold, burning anger that she recognized because she felt it too. "How many?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 847 confirmed dead. "Madam President," said Admiral Victor Kane. He was the commander of Earth's defense forces. A 60-year-old man with white hair and eyes that had seen too much. Men, women, and children. The youngest was 4 years old. 4 years old? Moore closed her eyes and saw her own grandchildren, safe in their beds, unaware that monsters existed in the universe. Kane stepped forward to the tactical display. "The Valkyrie homeworld is approximately 300 light-years from here, in a system they call Vertex. Our intelligence suggests they have a fleet of approximately 600 warships with another 200 in reserve. Their ground forces number in the millions, and we have 212 combat-ready vessels, Madam President. If we pull ships from every colony and station, we might raise that to 250. Someone in the back of the room made a small sound of despair. They were outnumbered nearly 3-1. The mathematics of war were against them. But Moore did not believe in mathematics. She believed in humanity. "What about the Prometheus arsenal?" she asked quietly. The room went silent. The Prometheus arsenal was humanity's darkest secret, a collection of weapons developed in secret laboratories on the moon. They had never been used, never been tested on living targets. They existed only as a last resort, a final option against threats that could not be defeated by conventional means. Kane met her eyes. "Madam President, if we deploy those weapons, there will be no going back. The galaxy will know what we are capable of. Every species will fear us." "They already know what the Valkyrie are capable of," Moore replied. "They watched for 30 years while the Empire conquered and enslaved. They did nothing. Fear is not always a bad thing, Admiral. Sometimes fear is the only thing that keeps monsters in check. The decision was made that night in a closed session of the Federation Council. The vote was not unanimous, but it was overwhelming. Humanity would respond to the massacre with everything it had, in the orbital shipyards above Mars. Workers who had never seen combat prepared for war. They loaded weapons and supplies, ran diagnostics on engines and shields, and said goodbye to families they might never see again. The shipyard worked around the clock, 3 shifts running without pause. Because there was no time to waste, Captain Elizabeth Harmon received orders while she was eating dinner in her quarters aboard the Resolute. The Dreadnought was the largest ship in the human fleet, a vessel 3 kilometers long with weapons that could crack a planet's crust. She had commanded it for 2 years. But she had never expected to use it in actual combat. She had even less expected to learn that. Her brother was dead. The notification had come separately from the military briefing, a personal message from the casualty office. Kevin Harmon, age 37, maintenance technician, killed in action at Frontier Station Horizon. No remains recovered. Harmon read the message 3 times before she understood what it meant. Kevin was gone. Her little brother, who had taught himself to play the guitar because he thought it would impress girls, would send her funny messages from the far side of the galaxy, who had always believed that humans were. The year was 2347, and humanity had spread far beyond the blue planet they once called home. Ships carrying families, scientists, and soldiers traveled between stars like cars once traveled between cities. Colonies grew on distant moons. Research stations floated in the darkness of space, and on the edge of everything humanity had built, there was a small station called Frontier Station Horizon. The station orbited a gray, lifeless moon in a system that most star maps did not even bother to name. It was not a glamorous posting. The corridors were narrow, the food was bland, and the nearest entertainment hub was 3 weeks away by fast ship. But for the 847 people who lived there, it was home. Commander Nate Holloway stood at the observation window of the command center, watching the slow spin of stars beyond the glass. He was 52 years old, with gray hair cut short and a face lined by decades of service. He had commanded warships in his younger days, fought pirates in the Outer Rim, and earned medals that now sat in a box somewhere on Earth, but he had requested this quiet posting. Far from politics and promotions because he was tired of fighting, his executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Diane Prescott, walked up beside him with a tablet in her hand. She was younger than him by 20 years, ambitious in the way that good officers should be, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Morning reports, sir," she said, handing him the tablet. "Nothing unusual. The geology team found some interesting mineral deposits on the moon's surface. Dr. Grant wants to send a shuttle down tomorrow to collect samples." Holloway nodded without looking at the report. "Approved. What about the communication relay?" "Chief Lane said it was acting up yesterday. Fixed this morning." Katie Morrison found a loose connection in the secondary array. "The girl has good instincts." "She does," Holloway agreed. He liked Katie. She was only fresh out of the technical academy on Mars, and she reminded him of his daughter back on Earth, eager, curious, always asking questions. The station was full of people like her. Young scientists studying alien plants in the hydroponics garden. Engineers keeping the old systems running with spare parts and creativity. Families who had chosen to raise their children among the stars. Children who had never seen a blue sky or felt rain on their faces. Holloway had sworn to protect them all. What he did not know, what no one on the station knew, was that they were being watched, 300 light-years away. On a planet called Vertex, the Valkyrie had been studying humanity for 30 years. They were a reptilian species, tall and powerful, with scales the color of dried blood and forearms that ended in clawed hands. Their empire stretched across 40 star systems. Built on the bones of species they had conquered and enslaved, the Valkyrie did not believe in diplomacy. They did not believe in trade or cooperation or mutual benefit. They believed in one simple truth: the strong survived, and the weak were food. Warlord Crixtal sat in his throne room, surrounded by screens showing data on the human species. He was old for a Velkari, nearly 200 years, and he had personally led the conquest of 6 worlds. His body was covered in scars from battles won, and his eyes glowed with the cold light of a predator. "The humans are weak," said his advisor, a younger warrior named Vethrok. "They value individual lives. They mourn their dead. They waste resources on those who cannot fight." Crystal made a sound that might have been laughter. "They spread quickly, like vermin. Their technology is crude, but improving. If we wait too long, they may become a threat. Then we do not wait." The decision was made in that moment, without debate or hesitation. The Velkar would strike at the human outpost on the edge of their space. They would kill everyone there, record the slaughter, and send the message to the human colonies. Fear was a weapon, and the Velkari had wielded it against 100 species before. On Frontier Station Horizon, life continued as it always did. Dr. Samuel Grant spent his mornings in the xenobiology lab, studying samples of Velkari tissue that had been collected from a crashed scout ship years ago. He was fascinated by their biology, by the efficiency of their four-armed bodies, by the way their scales could shift color to blend with their surroundings. He did not know that his research subjects were about to become his executioners. In the hydroponics garden, a botanist named Linda Harper was teaching 3 teenage students about alien plant life. The garden was her pride and joy, a green oasis in the metal heart of the station. She had grown vegetables that could survive in low gravity, flowers that bloomed in artificial light, and trees that would someday be planted on terraformed worlds. "Plants are patient," she told her students. "They do not rush. They grow slowly, adapting to their environment, finding ways to survive." There is a lesson in that for all of us. Students listened politely, though their minds were on other things. They were 16, 17 years old, and they dreamed of adventure and excitement, not patience and slow growth. They had no idea that in less than a day, they would be fighting for their lives. In the medical bay, Dr. Patricia Dunn was finishing her morning rounds. She was a gentle woman with kind eyes and steady hands, beloved by everyone on the station. Children came to her with scraped knees and stomach aches. She treated each one as if they were her own. Today, a young boy named Tommy sat on the examination table, complaining about a sore throat. His mother stood nearby, worry creasing her forehead. "It is just a minor infection," Dr. Dunn said with a reassuring smile. "Some medicine and rest, and he will be running around again by tomorrow."
Tomorrow.
Such a simple word. Such an impossible promise. In her small quarters near the communication center, Katie Morrison was finishing her shift. She had noticed something strange that morning. A burst of encrypted signals from beyond the asteroid field, but Chief Lane had told her not to worry about it. "Background radiation," he said. Space was full of strange noises, but Katie could not stop thinking about it. The signal had been too regular, too structured to be random. It felt like a pattern, like a message meant for someone else. She thought about reporting it again, going over Lane's head to Commander Holloway. But she was young and new, and she did not want to seem paranoid. So she filed her report, noted her concerns, and went to bed. 8 hours later, she would wake to the sound of alarms and the screams of the dying. The Valkyrie fleet was already moving. 12 warships, each one bristling with weapons, slid through the darkness of space toward the unsuspecting station. They had disabled their engines and were drifting on momentum alone, invisible to sensors. Patient as predators waiting for the perfect moment to strike. On the lead ship, Crystal watched the distant glow of Frontier Station Horizon grow larger in his view screen. He felt no excitement, no anticipation. This was not a battle. This was a message. It's written in blood and fire and death. The humans would learn their place in the galaxy, or they would be erased from it entirely. The stars continued their slow spin, indifferent to the violence about to unfold. And on the station, 847 people slept and worked, and dreamed of futures they would never see. The attack came at 0347 hours. Station time, when most of the crew was asleep and the corridors were quiet. There was no warning, no demand for surrender, no attempt at communication. One moment the stars were peaceful, and the next moment the sky was on fire. Katie Morrison was dreaming about her mother's garden back on Earth when the explosion threw her from her bed. She hit the floor hard, her ears ringing, her mind struggling to understand what was happening. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the angry red glow of emergency power. Through the walls, she could hear screaming. She grabbed her uniform and ran in the command center. Commander Holloway had been reviewing supply reports when the first plasma blast tore through the station's outer hull. The impact knocked him off his feet, and he felt something hot and wet running down his face. Blood. He touched his forehead and found a deep gash where he had struck the console, but there was no time for pain. Alarms were screaming throughout the station, and his crew needed orders. All hands battle stations? He shouted into the intercom, though he knew it was already too late. Through the cracked view screen he could see the shapes of enemy warships, their hulls painted the color of old blood, their weapons charging for another volley. This is not a drill. We are under attack. Security teams to defensive positions. All civilians to the emergency shelters. Lieutenant Commander Prescott arrived seconds later, her face pale, but her voice steady. Sir, we're counting 12 hostiles. Valkyrie configuration. They're jamming our long-range communications. Get a distress beacon out on every frequency we have. Someone will hear it. The nearest fleet is 6 days away. Holloway looked at her, and in that look was everything he could not say. They both knew what 6 days meant. They both knew that help would not arrive in time. Then we hold as long as we can, he said, and we make them pay for every inch. Throughout the station, chaos erupted. Families grabbed their children and ran for the shelters, only to find the corridors blocked by debris and fire. Engineers fought to seal hull breaches while the station groaned and shuddered around them. In the medical bay, Dr. Dunn was treating the first wave of wounded when the ceiling collapsed. She was holding young Tommy when it happened. His mother had gone to find his father, promising to return.